Hello, this is Ayub Fleming with segment 2 of Living the Max Life 365 with our special guest, Pastor Anthony Rodriguez, speaking on his journey through abuse and addiction. Please enjoy, and I hope you'll stay around for segment 3. All right, we're back. Again, I want to thank Mr. Rodriguez for being with us today on Living the Max Life 365.
Thank you for having me.
And we're going to start back with your story and talk about some of the abuse, both emotional and physical, that you suffered as a child. And I want to talk about how it related to some of the addictions and some of the decisions that you made. And then we'll talk about how you were locked up, that you talked about in the first segment, and for 30 months, and then getting back to your family and fatherhood and different things like that. So take me back to the story of the abuse that you suffered.
Well, there's been a lot of times, that I can recollect, being abused. I think one of the first thing that sticks out of my mind, when people talk about abuse, is being physically abused or sexually abused, and I was both, but I think I suffered more emotional abuse throughout my life. At a young age, I was molested by an uncle, and that played a part in me continuing to use drugs, and eventually became an excuse that I would use to use drugs. So a lot of people would enable me, and I had a lot of people who were codependent because I became an expert in manipulating, people, because throughout my life, that's what I seen. A lot of manipulation, a lot of drugs, from my parents to my aunts, uncles, and cousins. But at a very early age, I suffered a lot of emotional abuse because my house was like a refugee camp. My parents have a great heart. They really do. But with them having such a great heart, there was a lot of consequences throughout my time. My sister.
You didn't feel protected?
Yes, I did. At an early age, I did. But somewhere along the line, that covering wasn't there. Because how can you go up to a person, especially my dad, speaking about my dad, he's a great man, but I was more scared of my dad. I didn't have an open relationship with my dad. I wasn't able to say, hey, this is, something that I'm struggling with, or, I'm curious, or I'm having sex at such an early age, or this or that, because I was always answered with, I'm gonna beat your butt, or, you don't do that, I'm gonna knock your teeth out, or, you always expected a whooping. Growing up in those days, you got whooped, people didn't care. So I think the biggest emotional abuse was the people in and out of my house. People were smoking in my house, cigarettes and alcohol. We would have Christmas gatherings and Thanksgiving parties, and when I tell you we'd had 40, 50 people in the house at one time, just enjoying family, but amongst them were a lot of people who were addicts themselves. At a very early age, I was exposed to that, so that was the norm for me growing up. And
was this something in your family was hidden, or was it something that was open?
It was open.
The physical abuse was open as well?
Oh yeah, because if I had to get slapped, I get slapped. You didn't say certain things. You didn't behave a certain way. It took a lot for my father to hit me, but when he did, he left evidence that he was there.
Yeah.
And I've seen a lot of physical abuse with family members, and sexual abuse with family members. These were things that were swept under the rugs, especially in the Spanish culture. Some things weren't spoken about. Some things were overlooked. Uncles cheating on their wives. Hitting on their wives. I had homosexual cousins and lesbian cousins, and I loved them. But it was accepted in my house, the behavior. So seeing this, that became the norm. It became the norm to, at the age of 8, 9 years old, know what cocaine was. See my parents' records full of cocaine, and my uncle smoking, reefer in the bathroom or out in the yard, and smoking the cigarettes in the house and drinking beer in the house, and that would lead to other things, physical altercations, arguments. So I seen that growing up, and after a while, my parents, had to support us and had to work. And there was times we were left with family members, and there was a specific person that my parents would allow to look after us, and that's when the sexual abuse came in. The touching, going into the bathroom with me, the kissing, me inappropriately, not so much, kissing me, but kissing me, and I didn't know how to take that because I was scared to tell my dad. I wasn't taught that was wrong, but I knew it was wrong. Does that make sense?
Sure.
I knew it was wrong, but who do I go to talk to about?
So how did seeing the drug abuse and the addictions and being sexually abused, how did that begin to shape the way you saw not only your parents but saw your world, saw yourself? How did that begin to shape the way you think, the way you feel, the way you acted? I remember talking to you several times, and beyond the discipline and the freedom that you experienced with the martial arts, there was also a violent side and a violent expression of, as well as there were times that we talked about maybe even being confused about how you felt about yourself and about other things. So let's talk about that for a second.
I think the biggest thing was I knew I was meant to be great. Does that make sense? As a young man, I knew there was something great.
But you felt in conflict
that I was
with the life that you were living.
Yeah, because it didn't just blur my vision as a young man. It just like robbed me from that. I was stuck. I knew these things weren't right, but it became normal. At the age of 9, 10 years old, I'm licking cocaine off of records. I'm going behind cousins and drinking beer out of their bottle because that was accepted, that was okay, and I knew it was wrong, but yet I thought it was right because everybody else was doing it. Yeah. I'm smoking cigarette butts out of the ashtrays, and my first sexual experience was by a woman who would take care of us, here I am 9, 10 years old, and I'm messing around with a 16, 17-year-old girl and thinking that's okay.
And she was too young too.
Yeah.
For those type of experiences.
Exactly, but that's what she was going through as well. She was taught, because somebody in our family was taking advantage of her, and all she knew how to do was take advantage of somebody else. We become the victim, or we become so victimized throughout the time that eventually you become the predator. And I can see that, later down in my life, what I despised the most, I became. I became the liar. I became the thief, I became the manipulator, and I betrayed a lot of people, and that's something that I never expected that I would do. It weren't even my intentions, but it happened because when I went through that pain, when I was scared, I went back to what I knew best, and in doing that, that's when I started to medicate myself. Throughout my teenage years, I smoked pot, and I sniffed powder, and I drank, and all of this was hidden from my parents. And when I got caught, I got whooped pretty bad. I remember I was punished for my birthday, for a summer, and my dad let me out on my birthday. I got caught surfing the trains in New York. That's riding the train from one station to the next. And I got punished, and on my birthday, my father gave me a break and let me out. And the first thing I went to do was go buy a bag of weed. Here I am, 13, 14 years old. I know where the weed spot is at. You know what I mean? And so I go to the park to play some handball with a cousin of mine. And my dad drives by in another person's vehicle. He happens to be with my aunt or a cousin of ours, Juanita, and he saw me. So he gets home that night and he rings the doorbell. I answer the door and he says, "Hey son, what did you do today?" So I gave him an elaborate story. I'm in the park and how great I was and this and that, and I never forget, man. This fish just came and hit me straight in the face, and I fell onto this table we had in the living room, and I just jumped up and I was like, "Okay, I was smoking weed," you know, and that's
But
when
the conflict is this is something that you saw in your house on a regular basis.
right.
And so now he's punishing you for what he modeled for you in behavior between
because
him and your uncles and aunts and everyone else.
right, it was accepted, and for me, I was doing it behind his back because it wasn't accepted that I did it, but he would allow it to happen around me.
Around you.
So now I'm smoking pot with my cousins, you know. I'm even smoking with my uncles at such a young age, believe it or not. Or I'm going to get it for them, you know. Eventually at that age, believe it or not, I was selling it. And it became pretty physical at the house, you know, because he didn't know how else to handle me. You know, my dad wasn't a drinker or a smoker, but yet, since he didn't do it, it was okay for the people around us to do it, and they actually allowed it to be introduced into our household. And
So a lot of your years, you were really heavy conflict. So let's talk about that for a minute. So you're growing up, you're experiencing these different faiths, the Jewish faith, the Christian faith, Islam, and Buddhism, maybe even Hinduism through the martial arts. And the martial arts as a discipline, spirit, soul, and body in and of itself.
right,
But then you have, in your home environment, you have drugs, alcohol, physical abuse, you're sexually abused. So you have these two worlds that are always colliding. And at the same time, you're really seeking God, a true expression of God, and you want to know Him. And so you're not finding Him in the conflicts in your home. You're not finding Him in the religious expressions through these different faiths. Talk about the conflict, the addiction, where it led you, and how you eventually are not at conflict now, if you're not, or are you still at conflict?
no, actually, you know, I've been in long-term recovery now for going on 3.5 years, and I'm proud of that. And recovery for me has restored my family, trust between, you know, my friends, and have opened up some doors for me that have enabled me to move forward. It's almost like being normal again. And you know, throughout my life, you know, doing all these things, getting high and partying and you know, even becoming violent. You know, in Hartford, Connecticut, I lost a job as a firefighter because of alcohol and drugs, and that was my dream. So I became a sergeant of arms for some small little drug ring, and wound up getting into some trouble. You know, I was kicking in doors and collecting money, and an article was written on us, and by God's grace, me and another man became ministers. The other 14 of us, because it was a little crew, got life terms in prison. So, you know, I knew God always had a plan for me. Somehow, I was always able to get out of a situation, you know. I went off to the service, you know, I signed up to be a Marine, and I left, and I wound up getting kicked out, you know, because I had lied on my application about being arrested, and it came up. And so I seen that everything I worked towards doing to better myself, drugs and alcohol, it robbed me from that, you know. And I got sick and tired of it. So I had a cousin who lived out here in Florida that I lived with at one time in Connecticut, and he told my mom that he'd like to see me. So I came out here to visit him with a couple of, you know, a little suitcase, not even a book bag, a couple of jeans, a couple of shirts, thinking I'm staying for a week or two. And I wound up staying for about 15, 16 years. And here I am today, but in that process, God had a plan, and my cousin's rules were when he's not at home and he was at church, I had to be at church. That was it. To work, save some money, and when he was at church, to be at church. And I went to church probably the following day when I came to Florida. And the following service, I wound up giving my life to the Lord. You know, here's this man who's sitting at the altar, and he's kicked back with his hands up. He has this little tattoo, Bobby, on his hands, and I'm like, who's this guy? But I always had reverence, so I had a pack of Newports and some cocaine that I had bought from New York, believe it or not, and I stuck it under the bushes in the front of the church, and then I go into the church. and he was like, hey, how you doing? And I said, oh, I'm good. And he's like, what's your name? I said, I'm Anthony. So he's like, oh, you're the guy we've been praying for. So I'm like, here we go.
Yeah.
This guy's gonna prophesy. They told him all about me, but he said something that impacted me. He said, God didn't want you in the army of man, but in the army of the Lord. And that was like, wow, you know, this guy doesn't know me, and I was just, you know, I got kicked out of the military. Then he says, God didn't want you to put out the fire, but to start the fires in people's souls. And that impacted me. And now I'm a little scared, you know, like, wow, God is really talking to me. And he was really laid back. So I said to him, who's the pastor of this church? He said, I am. So I straightened up, and I was like, you know, because I had my feet kicked up with him off the altar, and we're talking, and he was like, no, just relax, make yourself at home. So he was my first spiritual father. And he also grew up very religious. And not only did I take the baggage from my grandfathers, you know, along with me in their teachings, but I adapted to his teachings, and it became part of my arsenal.
And you still felt conflict?
I did, because I wasn't delivered till that next service. When I gave my life to the Lord, I was sober about 5 years. I was sober 5 years, and I always struggled with the curiosity or the thought of getting high, but I didn't. And in that process, I got married to my wife, Jenny Melissa, who God has blessed me with. You know, she stuck with me through the good, the bad, and the ugly. People from the church, you know, her parents, people were just telling her, go, leave him, he's never going to change. But she saw the best in me, the good in me, when everybody else saw the worst. When I was written off, you know, she stood by my side. So being sober and getting married and then becoming an ordained minister, I was called to pastor a Spanish church. And here you get some kid from Brooklyn who hardly speaks Spanish, called to pastor a Spanish church that was very religious. It became challenging. And when I got to a point, you know, through my transition of relationship, from religion to relationship, it got so hard that I started to indulge again, you know, in
How did that start
drugs.
again?
I was introduced to a guy named Tony, you know, and he's a good guy, man. He'll give his shirt off his back for me. And Tony also struggled with drugs, and I had some problems with my back. I had gotten into an accident. And all my life, all I did was, you know, a little bit of cocaine and a little bit of reefer, you know, and drinking. You came to Florida, it's a different world. Everybody's popping pills. So I started taking prescribed medication. And I thought I had it under control. It was no problem. And then eventually, you know, it happened little by little, and I had relapsed.
And you were a pastor at the time?
No, I was right before I was going to get married to my wife. So I had left to New York, and I didn't marry her. You know, I called the wedding off and everything. And I wound up coming back. I wound up coming back to Florida, and we did get married. And everything went great, you know. We had a little apartment. We're pastoring a church. We just recently bought a house. And then I opened this barbershop. I had a really good friend named Davian Santana, who saw potential in me, a potential I didn't see, and he invested in me. And we opened a barbershop together. And it was one of the greatest things I've ever done.
Yeah, what, 5, 6 chairs?
Yeah, we had 10 chairs.
10 chairs.
I started with 7 chairs. The first month I cut on my own, and the rent was $2,500.
And you renovated the whole thing by yourself?
Yeah, me and my
Tile.
wife one night knocked everything down, cleaned the whole place out, and he came the next day and he was like, "How many guys you had with you last night?" I said, "How many guys?" It was me and my wife. And when he saw, you know, that tenacity in me, that want, that drive, he was like, "Man, we gotta, you know, I'm what you need." You know, he was a very smart man, you know, and he had the means to back me up whatever I needed, and he did. He did. We raised the roof. I put the drop ceilings. I put tiles. I painted the wall. I texturized it. Blood, sweat, and tears.
Mm-hmm. It's a beautiful shop.
Yeah, it is, and it's still there today. Actually, the guys who used to work for me, some of them still work at that shop, and I wind up losing the shop because of alcohol and drugs. I had a relapse. I met another gentleman at that time who was also prescribed, you know, these medications that I was asking him to bring me, you know, because I had back problems, and that was the excuse. But eventually, I justified that it was prescribed medication, and then eventually getting my own prescription to use them. And, you know, then you start indulging in a different lifestyle. So now I'm pastoring a church, you know, I'm using prescription drugs, and then I'm starting to get involved with a different lifestyle. I wanted to make this money that I saw my partner making and live that lifestyle. So I'm have one foot in the kingdom and one foot out, and I'm struggling with religion, and then I'm struggling with my addiction. So I'm just messed up. I was all over the place,
And it all started to come apart.
I remember you used that analogy, the snowball effect, one time, and it snowballed. It came.
You borrowed a lot of money?
More than what you can expect. I had another great friend of mine who trusted me, and one thing led to another. I'm spending $5 and $6 grand a week on my habit, and that's how horrible it was. You know, now I'm having to borrow money to make payroll. I borrowed money from you. I borrowed money from, you know, people who trusted me. You know, I'm not talking about $2,000 and $3,000. I'm talking about $20,000 at one shot, 50 grand at one shot. I had another friend, he invested in me, a young man by the name of Mike. Wherever you are, Mike, I love you, and I'm sorry. And he invested a lot of money in me, and I took advantage of that. I took advantage of his trust. And
So at what I would describe at the lowest, and maybe it wasn't, you're a pastor of a church. You're ordained in the ministry, like I said, because you ordained me and another guy as well at the same time, and we're going to include a picture of that. But I remember going with your wife and your sister-in-law to try to get you out of motels and places like that. A lot of people maybe know, some don't know. There were times you would get high in church.
Yeah.
You would even
I wouldn't even preach. I would pop 2 or 3 Oxycontins right before the service. And
I remember my Bible study. You would get high, and maybe my Bible study was that bad.
No, it was. The Bible studies were so good that's why I would go, because if it was anything else, I would be locked up somewhere. And the part about that is that I knew I was saved. I loved God with all my heart, and I preached His word. I seen God's glory. I seen God moving in such a way, but I was stuck. And that's what many ministers today struggle with.
You remember the baptism that we did in the lake?
Yeah, absolutely. We baptized people.
Beautiful services that we had.
Amazing services. And we seen God's glory. We seen Him moving. And, you know, I put my guard down. You know, the Bible says a little bit of yeast is enough to rise the dough. And there's a huge epidemic, I call it, in the church nowadays.
A lot of the kids that you minister to, and I remember having a youth class, and we said no parents allowed. We wanted to have them free, and see a lot of the young men struggling not only with drugs and addiction, but really struggling with sex at an early age. The girls had their own struggles, much the same. Dealing with addiction and conflict and having strife in the home and all these things, what would you say to the kids who are struggling with the same things, who maybe really want to have a relationship with God, want to be free, but they find themselves with the conflict at home, conflict in school, find themselves struggling between wanting to find an expression of faith on one hand, but struggling with the sexuality and addictions. And what would you say to them, having been there?
There's hope. There is hope because I lost that hope. When you lose that hope, it's a dangerous place because then you become accepted, or you become a part of a group that accepts you and everything that you're doing. So the sex is okay and the drugs is okay. But deep down inside, you know it's not okay. You know it's not okay. And you have to find this place where you can just scream and cry out, out to God, because I've lost, a lot of friends to addiction. One of the biggest things that I carry is I knew a young man who was getting high, and he's not with us today. And if I could have intervened in his life and try to help him and tell him these words that I'm saying now, I believe he would be alive today. But I didn't, because I was also struggling in my addiction, so I overlooked it. And I feel like his blood is on my hands, and I struggled with that for many years. These young kids nowadays think that they're unstoppable, and I was at that point where it can't happen to me. And you know what? It did. It didn't happen as fast as it does to others. By God's grace, it didn't take me out, but it does. And before you know it, you're in a point where if you don't cry out to God, you're at a point of no return. And if you're not saved, let me tell you, man, you're in for a rude awakening. So, you need to really understand, that the what if factor, what if this is my last hit? What if I don't make it home tonight? What if I sleep with this guy, or if I sleep with this girl, I catch, an STD? What if, and you have to be convicted. You have to listen to that thing inside of you, which is the Spirit of God, because it was given to us to do the right thing, and you have to love yourself enough to get help. I thought I can do it on my own, brother. I can't. And the only way I was able to keep what I have now, my recovery, is by giving it away. Because who would have ever thought I would have been able to reach, the level of success that I had, and lose it all, and find myself, in a prison, a pastor, a minister, a business owner, a father, a husband, a son, a friend, and I don't wish that upon anybody.